The morning mist clung to the Euphrates River like a gray blanket, muffling the sounds of the small Iraqi village that lay sleeping along its banks. Chief Petty Officer Marcus Kane adjusted his night vision goggles and scanned the muddy shoreline through the scope of his M4 carbine. Behind him, 5 other Navy SEALs moved like ghosts through the tall reeds, their boots making barely a whisper against the wet earth. 30 meters to target building, whispered Lieutenant Commander James Rodriguez through the calm. His voice carried the calm authority that had kept Bravo Team alive through 17 missions in this hostile territory. Remember, we go in quiet. Intel says our high-value target is in there with at least 6 hostiles. Kane nodded silently and continued his overwatch position. The team had been tracking Abu Rashid for 3 months. The bomb maker had been responsible for at least 12 IED attacks that killed American soldiers and countless Iraqi civilians. Tonight, they would finally put an end to his reign of terror. The target building stood like a dark monument against the pre-dawn sky. It was a 2-story concrete structure with small windows and a flat roof, typical of the construction in this rural area. Intelligence reports indicated that Rashid was meeting with other cell leaders to plan a major attack on the Green Zone in Baghdad. Petty Officer First Class Mike Thompson took point, his massive frame moving with surprising grace through the shadows. Behind him followed Hospital Corpsman Second Class Sarah Chen, the team's medic and one of the finest shots Kane had ever seen. Petty Officer Second Class David Martinez and Petty Officer Third Class Alex Johnson flanked the building's rear entrance while Rodriguez prepared to breach the front. Eyes on target, Kane reported softly into his headset. Through his scope, he could see 2 sentries on the roof, their AK-47s gleaming dully in the starlight. 2 tangos on the roof, northwest and southeast corners. They look alert. Chen's voice crackled through the calm. I can take them both from here. Clean shots. Negative, Rodriguez replied. We stick to the plan. Silent takedown only if necessary. Thompson, Martinez, you're up. Kane watched as Thompson scaled the building's exterior wall with the fluid motion of a natural climber. Martinez appeared on the opposite side, moving toward the second sentry. The 2 SEALs had performed this exact maneuver dozens of times in training and twice in actual combat. They knew each other's movements like dancers who had rehearsed the same routine for years. The sentries never saw them coming. Thompson's knife found its mark just as Martinez neutralized his target. Both bodies were lowered silently to the rooftop, where they would remain hidden until the mission was complete. Roof clear, Thompson reported. Moving to breach point. Kane shifted his position slightly, maintaining overwatch as the team prepared to enter the building. His job was to watch for reinforcements and provide sniper support if things went wrong. In his 12 years with the SEALs, he had learned that even the best planned operations could turn deadly in seconds. The team moved with precision that came from months of training and years of combat experience. Rodriguez and Johnson breached the front door while Thompson and Martinez entered through a rear window. Chen maintained position outside, ready to provide covering fire or medical assistance as needed. First floor clear, came Rodriguez's whispered report. Moving to second floor. Kane swept his scope across the surrounding area, looking for any signs of movement. The village remained quiet, its residents unaware that American Special Forces were conducting an operation in their midst. A dog barked somewhere in the distance, but, otherwise, the night remained peaceful. Second floor clear, Thompson's voice reported. No sign of target. Kane felt his stomach tighten. Intelligence had been certain that Rashid would be here tonight. They had intercepted communications, tracked vehicle movements, and even had a local source confirm the meeting. If the target wasn't here, it meant either their intelligence was wrong or they had walked into a trap. Check the basement, Rodriguez ordered. Sweep every room twice. Kane continued his surveillance, but something felt wrong. The village was too quiet, too peaceful. In his experience, when high-value targets like Rashid met with other terrorists, there were usually more security measures in place. Where were the perimeter guards? Where were the lookouts? Negative on target, Martinez reported after 10 minutes of searching. Building is clear except for one scared family in the back bedroom. Looks like we missed him. Rodriguez's frustration was evident even through the static of the radio. "Damn it! Pack it up, people. We're moving to extraction point." As the team prepared to leave the building, Kane noticed movement in his peripheral vision. A figure was climbing out of what appeared to be a drainage pipe that led directly to the river. The person was completely covered in mud and moved with the careful precision of someone trying to remain undetected. "Hold position," Kane whispered urgently into his comm. "I've got movement near the river. Possible squirter from drainage system." Through his scope, Kane could see that the figure was wearing civilian clothes but carried what appeared to be a sniper rifle wrapped in waterproof material. The person moved along the riverbank, using the natural cover of rocks and vegetation to remain hidden. "I see him," Chen reported from her position. "Adult male, armed with long rifle. He's moving toward the village center." Kane felt his pulse quicken. This had to be Rashid or one of his associates. The bomb maker was known for his paranoia and elaborate escape plans. Using the drainage system to escape to the river was exactly the kind of contingency plan he would have in place. "Team, we have a possible HVT moving along the riverbank." Rodriguez's voice was sharp with renewed focus. "Kane, maintain eyes on target. Rest of team, move to intercept." The muddy figure continued moving along the bank, apparently unaware that he was being watched. Kane tracked him through his scope, ready to take the shot if ordered. The range was about 400 meters, an easy shot for someone with his training and experience. "Target is moving toward what looks like a boat landing," Kane reported. "If he reaches that boat, we're going to lose him." The team began moving quickly but quietly toward the riverbank. Thompson and Martinez took a direct route while Rodriguez and Johnson flanked left. Chen moved to a position where she could provide overwatch support for the approaching team members. Kane continued tracking the target, who had now reached the boat landing. Through his scope, Kane could see the man unwrapping his rifle and assembling what appeared to be a high-powered sniper system. This was definitely not a civilian. "Target is armed with sniper rifle," Kane reported. "He's setting up a firing position overlooking the village." Suddenly, the situation became clear. This wasn't an escape, it was a counter-ambush. Rashid or his associates had anticipated the SEAL team's arrival and prepared a killing field. The empty building had been bait to draw the Americans into position where they could be eliminated by sniper fire. "It's a trap," Rodriguez's voice was grim. "All teams, find cover immediately." Kane watched through his scope as the enemy sniper finished assembling his weapon and began scanning the area where the SEAL team had been operating. The weapon appeared to be a Dragunov or similar high-powered rifle, capable of accurate shots at ranges well beyond what the SEAL's M4 carbines could effectively engage. "I have a clear shot," Kane reported. "Permission to engage." "Take it," Rodriguez ordered without hesitation. Kane controlled his breathing and settled into his shooting position. 400 meters was well within his capability, but shooting in low-light conditions with a moving target required perfect technique. He had made similar shots dozens of times in training and several times in combat, but the stakes had never felt higher. Through his scope, Kane could see the enemy sniper adjusting his position and preparing to fire on the SEAL team. There was no time for hesitation. Kane placed his crosshairs center mass on the target, took a deep breath, let half of it out, and began his trigger squeeze. The shot echoed across the water like thunder, shattering the pre-dawn quiet. Through his scope, Kane watched as the enemy sniper jerked backward and fell motionless onto the muddy riverbank. The threat had been neutralized. "Target down," Kane reported calmly. "Threat eliminated." The team quickly moved to the location where the enemy sniper had fallen. What they found surprised them all. The dead man was not Abu Rashid, but rather a young fighter who couldn't have been more than 19 years old. His sniper rifle was well maintained but old, probably dating back to the Soviet era. "This isn't our guy," Thompson reported as he searched the body. "This is just some kid with an old rifle." Rodriguez examined the weapon and the position the young man had been preparing. "Maybe not, but he was definitely setting up to take shots at us." "Good work, Kane." As the team prepared to move to their extraction point, Kane couldn't shake the feeling that something was still wrong. The intelligence about Rashid had been solid, and the bomb maker was known for his elaborate planning. It seemed unlikely that he would rely on a single teenage sniper to eliminate an entire SEAL team. "Sir," Chen called out from near the water's edge. "You need to see this." The team gathered around a small cave opening that Chen had discovered hidden behind some rocks and vegetation. The entrance was barely large enough for a person to crawl through, but it appeared to lead back under the village. "Looks like our drainage system connects to a whole network of tunnels," Martinez observed. "This could explain how Rashid got away." Rodriguez made the decision to investigate. "Thompson, Johnson, stay here and watch our six. The rest of us are going to check out these tunnels." Kane secured his sniper rifle and pulled out his M4 carbine as the reduced team prepared to enter the tunnel system. The confined space would make his long-range skills useless, but his training included extensive close-quarters combat experience. The tunnels were older than Kane had expected, carved from the natural rock and reinforced with concrete in some places. They appeared to be part of an irrigation system that dated back decades, possibly to the time when this area was more heavily farmed. "These tunnels go on for hundreds of meters," Chen observed as they moved carefully through the narrow passages. "Perfect for moving people and supplies without being detected." Kane was beginning to understand the scope of what they had stumbled into. This wasn't just a meeting location for Rashid and his associates, it was a major logistics hub for terrorist operations in the region. The tunnel system would allow fighters to move throughout the area without ever appearing on the surface where they could be spotted by aerial surveillance. After 20 minutes of careful exploration, the team emerged into a larger chamber that appeared to be a storage area. Wooden crates were stacked along the walls, and Kane could smell the distinctive odor of explosives and weapons. "Jackpot," Rodriguez whispered. "This is a major weapons cache." The team spread out to examine the contents of the chamber. Kane found crates filled with plastic explosives, detonators, and timing devices, everything needed to build the kind of improvised explosive devices that had been killing American soldiers and Iraqi civilians. Chen discovered communications equipment and what appeared to be detailed maps of Baghdad showing potential target locations. Martinez found several fake identification documents and travel papers that would allow terrorists to move freely throughout Iraq. "Sir, you need to see this," Johnson's voice crackled through the radio from outside. "We've got company coming." Kane and the others immediately moved toward the tunnel entrance. Through the radio, they could hear the sound of vehicles approaching the village. Multiple engines, probably trucks or SUVs carrying armed men. "How many?" Rodriguez asked as the team began moving quickly through the tunnels toward the entrance. "Looks like 3 vehicles, maybe 15 to 20 personnel," Johnson reported. "They're heavily armed and they know where they're going." Kane realized that the young sniper they had eliminated must have been in communication with reinforcements. When he failed to check in or take his assigned shots, the backup team had been dispatched to investigate. The team reached the tunnel entrance just as the first vehicle arrived at the boat landing where Kane had taken his shot. Through the pre-dawn darkness, Kane could see muzzle flashes as the enemy fighters began searching the area. "They found their boy," Thompson reported grimly. "And they don't look happy about it." Kane moved back to his sniper position and began scanning the enemy force through his scope. The fighters were well-equipped and disciplined, nothing like the disorganized insurgents the team usually encountered. These men moved like professional soldiers, using proper tactical formations and fire and movement techniques. "These aren't local fighters," Kane observed. "These guys have serious training." Rodriguez nodded grimly. "Probably foreign fighters, maybe Syrian or Iranian special forces. The kind of people Rashid would call in for serious operations." The enemy force was now spreading out to search the area systematically. Kane counted at least 18 men, all carrying modern assault rifles and wearing body armor. They had night vision equipment and were using coordinated hand signals to communicate. "We're outnumbered 3-1, Chen pointed out quietly. "And they know the terrain better than we do." Kane continued watching through his scope as the enemy force completed their initial sweep of the boat landing area. They had found their dead sniper and were now expanding their search pattern to locate the Americans who had killed him. "They're going to find those tunnels eventually," Martinez observed. "When they do, they'll know exactly where we've been." Rodriguez was already planning their next move. "Kane, can you slow them down from here?" Kane studied the enemy positions through his scope. They were being smart about their movement, using cover and staying spread out. But their leader was standing near the boats, probably coordinating the search effort via radio. "I can take out their commander," Kane reported. "That should disrupt their coordination for a few minutes." "Do it." Kane settled into his firing position and began his target acquisition process. The enemy commander was about 300 meters away, partially concealed behind a small boat. It wasn't an impossible shot, but it would require precise timing to catch him when he exposed himself. Through his scope, Kane watched as the commander moved back and forth, directing his men via radio and hand signals. The man was clearly experienced, never staying in one position for more than a few seconds. But Kane had patience. It was one of the key qualities that made him an effective sniper. After 2 minutes of waiting, the commander made his mistake. He stepped out from behind the boat to point toward the village, exposing his torso for Kane's shot. Kane's rifle barked once, and the enemy commander crumpled to the ground. Immediately, the coordinated movement of the enemy force began to break down as individual fighters tried to figure out where the shot had come from. "Target down," Kane reported. "They're confused but not retreating." The enemy fighters began firing randomly in the direction they thought the shot had come from, but they were shooting too high and too far to the right. Kane's position was well concealed, and the muzzle flash from his rifle had been minimal. "That bought us some time," Rodriguez said, "but they're going to reorganize quickly. We need to move." Kane packed up his sniper rifle and prepared to follow the team toward their extraction point. Behind them, the enemy fighters were calling out to each other in Arabic, trying to re-establish command and control after losing their leader. The SEAL team moved carefully through the darkness, using the natural cover of the riverbank vegetation to mask their movement. Their extraction point was 2 kilometers away, where a helicopter would pick them up at first light. As they moved, Kane couldn't help thinking about the young sniper he had killed earlier. The boy couldn't have been much older than 18, probably recruited from one of the local villages with promises of money for his family. But he had been carrying a sniper rifle and preparing to kill American soldiers, which made him a legitimate target regardless of his age. "Contact rear," Chen called out softly. "They're following our trail." Kane looked back and could see flashlights moving along the riverbank about 400 meters behind them. The enemy force had regrouped more quickly than expected and was now pursuing the SEAL team toward their extraction point. "Pick up the pace," Rodriguez ordered. "We need to reach that LZ before they catch up." The team began moving faster, but Kane knew they were leaving an increasingly obvious trail in the soft mud along the riverbank. The enemy fighters were using dogs now. Kane could hear them barking in the distance. Once the dogs picked up their scent, the chase would become much more difficult. "Sir, we're not going to make it at this pace," Thompson reported. "Those dogs are going to run us down before we reach extraction." Kane made a decision that he knew his teammates would understand. "I'll stay behind and slow them down. Give you guys time to reach the LZ." "Negative," Rodriguez replied immediately. "We don't leave anyone behind." Kane had expected that response, but he also knew it was the only tactical option that made sense. A single sniper in a good position could hold up a much larger force for a significant amount of time, especially in the low-light conditions that favored the defender. "Sir, it's the only way," Kane insisted. "I can hold them here for at least 30 minutes. That's enough time for you to reach extraction and call in close air support." Rodriguez stopped the team and turned to face Kane directly. In the dim starlight, Kane could see the conflict in his commanding officer's eyes. Every SEAL knew that sometimes tactical necessity required difficult decisions, but that didn't make those decisions any easier. 20 minutes, Rodriguez finally agreed. "Hold them for 20 minutes, then break contact and move to the alternate extraction point. We'll have a bird waiting for you." Kane nodded and began looking for a good defensive position. About 50 meters ahead, he spotted a small rocky outcrop that would provide both cover and a good field of fire back along the riverbank. It was exactly the kind of position he had been trained to identify and utilize. The team continued toward their primary extraction point while Kane settled into his improvised sniper hide. He had his M4 carbine with 6 magazines of ammunition, plus his sidearm and 2 fragmentation grenades. It wasn't much against 18 enemy fighters, but it would have to be enough. Through his rifle scope, Kane could see the pursuing force moving steadily along the riverbank. The dogs were definitely tracking the SEAL team's scent, and the handlers were having no trouble following the trail through the mud. Kane estimated that the enemy fighters would reach his position in about 10 minutes. That gave him time to prepare his firing positions and plan his engagement strategy. His goal wasn't to eliminate the entire enemy force, that would be impossible, but rather to delay them long enough for his teammates to escape. The lead elements of the pursuing force came into view just as Kane had predicted. 2 men with dogs, followed by the main body of fighters spread out in a tactical formation. They were moving carefully but steadily, confident that they were closing in on their prey. Kane let the dog handlers pass his position without engaging. His priority targets were the fighters who posed the greatest threat to his team's escape. He identified what appeared to be the new squad leader and several men carrying heavy weapons. When the main body of the enemy force reached a position about 200 meters from Kane's hide, he opened fire. His first shot took down the squad leader, immediately throwing the enemy formation into confusion. Kane's training took over as he shifted targets and continued engaging. His second shot eliminated a fighter carrying what appeared to be a rocket-propelled grenade launcher. His third shot took down a man who was trying to coordinate the enemy response via radio. The surviving enemy fighters took cover and began returning fire, but they were shooting at muzzle flashes and sound, not at Kane's actual position. Their shots were striking the rocks around his hide but not coming close to his body. Kane continued his methodical engagement, taking carefully aimed shots at targets of opportunity. His years of training had taught him to control his breathing, manage his adrenaline, and maintain accurate fire even under extreme stress. After 5 minutes of intense firefighting, Kane had eliminated 6 enemy fighters and wounded at least 3 others. The remaining forces had taken cover and were calling for reinforcements on their radios. Kane checked his watch. He had been in position for 15 minutes, which meant his teammates should be approaching their extraction point. It was time for him to break contact and move to the alternate landing zone. As Kane prepared to leave his position, he heard the distinctive sound of helicopter rotors in the distance. The sound was coming from the direction of the primary extraction point, which meant his teammates had successfully reached safety. Now Kane faced his own extraction challenge. The alternate landing zone was 1 kilometer away, and he would have to cross open ground to reach it. The remaining enemy fighters would certainly pursue him, and they still had the tracking dogs. Kane gathered his equipment and began moving carefully away from his firing position. Behind him, he could hear the enemy fighters calling out to each other as they realized their target was no longer shooting at them. The next 20 minutes would determine whether Kane made it home or became another casualty in the ongoing war against terrorism. But, for now, the mission had been successful. His teammates were safe, the weapons cache had been discovered, and several enemy fighters had been eliminated. As Kane moved through the darkness toward his extraction point, he couldn't know that his actions tonight would set in motion a chain of events that would lead to one of the most dramatic confrontations of his military career. The shot that had started everything was just the beginning of a story that would test his skills, his courage, and his loyalty to his teammates in ways he could never have imagined. Kane moved through the pre-dawn darkness like a shadow, every step calculated to minimize noise and avoid detection. The alternate extraction point lay 800 meters ahead through terrain that offered little cover, mostly flat ground with scattered rocks and sparse vegetation. Behind him, he could hear the enemy fighters regrouping and beginning their pursuit. The tracking dogs were his biggest concern. Even if he managed to lose the human pursuers, the animals would follow his scent trail directly to wherever he tried to hide. Kane's only advantage was his head start and his intimate knowledge of escape and evasion techniques that had been drilled into him during years of SEAL training. As he moved, Kane's mind raced through his options.
The helicopter that would extract him wasn't due at the alternate landing zone for another 18 minutes.
That meant he needed to either find a way to lose his pursuers completely or find a defensible position where he could hold out until the bird arrived. Through his earpiece, Kane heard the reassuring voice of Lieutenant Commander Rodriguez confirming that the primary extraction had been successful.
Kane, primary team is airborne and safe. Your bird is inbound to LZ-2. ETA 15 minutes. Copy that, Kane whispered back. I've got approximately 12 hostiles in pursuit with dogs. Moving to LZ-2 now. Kane reached a small depression in the ground that provided temporary concealment.
He paused to catch his breath and assess his situation. Through his night vision goggles, he could see the lights of his pursuers spread out in a searchline about 300 meters behind him. They were moving systematically, using the dogs to follow his trail. The terrorist fighters had learned from their earlier losses. Instead of bunching up where a single sniper could eliminate multiple targets, they had spread out into a proper search formation.
Each man was far enough from his neighbors to prevent Kane from engaging multiple targets quickly.
Kane resumed his movement toward the extraction point, but now he could hear the dogs getting closer. Their barking was becoming more excited, which meant they were following a fresh scent trail. Kane estimated he had maybe 10 minutes before the lead elements of the pursuit force would be close enough to engage him with accurate rifle fire. The terrain ahead was even more challenging than Kane had hoped. The alternate landing zone was located in what appeared to be an old quarry, with steep walls on three sides and only one narrow approach. It was an excellent defensive position if Kane could reach it before his pursuers, but it would also be a death trap if they got there first.
Kane's radio crackled with an update from the incoming helicopter. Kane, this is Razor 1. We're 5 minutes out from LZ-2.
Be advised, we're picking up multiple heat signatures converging on your location.
Copy that, Razor 1, Kane replied. I've got hostiles in pursuit. LZ may be hot when you arrive.
Kane pushed himself harder, knowing that every second counted. The quarry was now visible ahead, a dark hole in the landscape that promised either safety or death, depending on who reached it first. As Kane approached the rim of the quarry, he heard gunshots behind him. The pursuers had found his last hiding position and were firing at shadows, hoping to get lucky. Their muzzle flashes lit up the darkness like deadly fireflies, revealing their positions to Kane's trained eyes. Kane reached the edge of the quarry and quickly rappelled down using a rope technique that every SEAL learned during basic training. The quarry floor was about 20 feet below the rim, with large rocks that would provide excellent cover for a defensive position. Once at the bottom, Kane immediately began preparing his defenses. He positioned himself behind the largest boulder, which offered protection from multiple angles while still allowing him good fields of fire toward the quarry entrance. The sound of the approaching helicopter was becoming audible now, a distant rhythmic thumping that grew steadily louder. But Kane could also hear voices and barking dogs at the quarry rim above him.
The timing was going to be very close. Razor 1, this is Kane.
I'm in position at LZ-2, but hostiles are moving to overwatch positions.
You're going to be coming into a hot LZ. Copy that, Kane. We're 2 minutes out. Can you suppress enemy positions?
Kane studied the rim of the quarry through his rifle scope. He could see several figures moving into positions where they would be able to fire down at the helicopter when it arrived.
If he didn't neutralize those threats, the extraction bird would be flying into a devastating crossfire. Affirmative, Razor 1. Give me 30 seconds to clear the LZ. Kane began engaging targets on the quarry rim with rapid, precise fire.
His first shot eliminated a fighter who was setting up what appeared to be a machine gun position. His second shot took down another man who was trying to direct the placement of his comrades. The enemy fighters immediately took cover and began returning fire, but shooting down into the quarry put them at a significant disadvantage. Kane's position among the rocks provided excellent protection, while the enemy had to expose themselves to locate and engage him. The sound of helicopter rotors was now unmistakable, and Kane could see the aircraft's navigation lights approaching through the darkness. The pilot was flying low and fast, using terrain masking to minimize exposure to enemy fire. Kane, Razor 1 is 30 seconds out.
Mark your position with infrared strobe.
Kane activated his infrared beacon, which would be invisible to the naked eye but clearly visible to the helicopter crew's night vision equipment. The device would help the pilot locate Kane's exact position among the rocks and debris on the quarry floor. As the helicopter approached the landing zone, enemy fire from the rim intensified dramatically. Kane could hear bullets striking the rocks around his position and ricocheting off the quarry walls. The terrorist fighters were concentrating their fire on his location, trying to eliminate him before the helicopter could complete the extraction. Kane continued returning fire, but he was now facing at least 8 enemy fighters in elevated positions with good cover. His ammunition supply was running low. He had 2 magazines left for his M4 carbine plus his sidearm. The helicopter pilot demonstrated exceptional skill as he brought the aircraft down into the confined space of the quarry while under enemy fire. Kane could hear bullets striking the aircraft's fuselage, but the pilot maintained control and settled the bird onto the quarry floor about 30 meters from Kane's position. "Kane, move to the bird now," the crew chief's voice shouted over the radio. Kane gathered his equipment and began moving toward the helicopter, using fire and movement techniques to avoid presenting a stationary target to the enemy fighters above. He fired several bursts toward the quarry rim to suppress enemy fire, then sprinted toward the waiting aircraft. Halfway to the helicopter, Kane heard a sound that made his blood run cold, the distinctive whoosh of a rocket-propelled grenade being fired. Someone among the enemy fighters had an RPG, and they were targeting the extraction helicopter. Kane dove for cover behind a pile of rubble just as the grenade exploded against the quarry wall, sending fragments of rock and shrapnel whistling through the air. The helicopter pilot immediately began pulling pitch to get his aircraft out of the confined space before another rocket could be fired. "Kane, we're taking fire from an RPG," the pilot shouted over the radio.
"I can't stay in this position." Kane realized that the extraction was about to be aborted unless he could eliminate the RPG threat. Through the dust and smoke from the explosion, he tried to locate the source of the rocket fire. "Razor 1, give me 2 minutes to neutralize the RPG position, then come back in." "Copy that, Kane. We'll orbit at low level until you call us back."
Kane moved carefully through the quarry debris, using the smoke and confusion to mask his movement. He needed to get to a position where he could identify and engage the RPG operator before the man could reload and fire again. As the dust settled, Kane spotted movement near the quarry rim where the rocket had been fired from. Through his rifle scope, he could see a figure kneeling behind a large rock with what appeared to be a reloaded RPG launcher. The range was nearly 400 meters and, shooting upward at a steep angle, one of the most difficult shots a sniper could attempt. But Kane had trained for exactly this type of scenario during countless hours on shooting ranges and in combat simulations. Kane settled into a stable shooting position and began his target acquisition process. The RPG operator was partially concealed behind cover, with only his head and shoulders visible. A miss would mean the helicopter couldn't return for extraction, and Kane would be trapped in the quarry with a superior enemy force. Through his scope, Kane watched as the RPG operator made final adjustments to his weapon and prepared to fire at the circling helicopter. There was no time for hesitation. Kane controlled his breathing, settled his crosshairs, and squeezed the trigger. The shot echoed through the quarry like thunder, and Kane watched through his scope as the enemy fighter pitched backward and disappeared behind the rocks. "RPG threat neutralized," Kane reported over the radio.
"LZ is clear for extraction."
The helicopter pilot immediately responded, bringing his aircraft back down into the quarry with the same skill he had demonstrated before. This time, Kane was able to reach the bird without taking effective enemy fire, though bullets continued to strike around his position as he ran. Kane dove through the helicopter's open door just as the pilot began pulling the aircraft up and out of the quarry. The crew chief helped Kane into a seat and immediately began checking him for injuries while the aircraft climbed rapidly away from the enemy positions. "Nice shooting down there," the crew chief shouted over the engine noise. "That RPG would have ruined our whole day." Kane nodded and began conducting his own assessment of the mission. The primary objective, capturing Abu Rashid, had not been achieved, but the team had discovered a major weapons cache and eliminated several enemy fighters. More importantly, all team members were alive and safely extracted. As the helicopter flew toward the forward operating base, Kane reflected on the young sniper he had killed at the beginning of the engagement. The boy's death had triggered a chain of events that led to this dramatic extraction, and Kane wondered if there had been any way to avoid the casualties that followed. But Kane also knew that second-guessing combat decisions was a luxury that soldiers couldn't afford. Every member of the enemy force had been armed and actively trying to kill American personnel. In that context, Kane's actions had been not only justified but necessary to protect his teammates and accomplish the mission. The helicopter touched down at the forward operating base just as the sun was beginning to rise over the Iraqi countryside. Kane gathered his gear and walked across the tarmac to the debriefing facility, where Lieutenant Commander Rodriguez was waiting with hot coffee and a concerned expression.
"Good to have you back in one piece," Rodriguez said as Kane approached. "That was some impressive shooting back there."
Kane accepted the coffee gratefully and settled into a chair for what he knew would be a lengthy debriefing process. Every aspect of the mission would be analyzed and documented, from the initial intelligence failure to the dramatic extraction under fire.
"What's the word on Rashid?" Kane asked. "Any idea where he went?"
Rodriguez shook his head grimly.
"Still in the wind.
But intelligence thinks the weapons cache you discovered is going to lead to bigger things.
They're analyzing everything you brought back."
Kane nodded and began the process of unloading and cleaning his weapons while Rodriguez prepared for the formal debriefing. In a few hours, Kane would be able to get some sleep, but, for now, there was paperwork to complete and lessons to be learned. The debriefing lasted 3 hours and covered every detail of the mission from beginning to end. Kane described his shots, his tactical decisions, and his assessment of enemy capabilities. Military intelligence officers asked detailed questions about the weapons cache, the tunnel system, and the training level of the enemy fighters. "The fighters pursuing you were definitely not local insurgents," one intelligence analyst concluded after reviewing Kane's observations. "The tactics and equipment you described suggest foreign special forces, probably Iranian Revolutionary Guard."
Kane wasn't surprised by that assessment.
The enemy fighters had moved and fought with a level of discipline that only came from professional military training. Their equipment had also been newer and better maintained than what local insurgents typically carried. "That explains why they were so aggressive about pursuing us," Rodriguez observed.
"Professional soldiers don't like leaving evidence behind that could compromise their operations."
The intelligence analysts were particularly interested in the tunnel system Kane had discovered. Aerial photographs showed that the drainage network extended throughout the region, providing terrorists with a sophisticated transportation and logistics system that had previously been unknown to American forces.
"We're going to need to map that entire tunnel network," the lead analyst said.
"If Rashid is using it for operations, there could be weapons caches and safe houses throughout the area." Kane spent the rest of the day writing his after-action report and attending additional debriefings with various military and intelligence officials. Everyone wanted to understand exactly what had happened during the mission and how it might affect future operations in the region. That evening, Kane finally had time to process the events of the previous 24 hours. He sat in his quarters, cleaning his rifle and thinking about the faces of the men he had killed. In 12 years of military service, Kane had learned to compartmentalize these experiences, but they never became easier. The young sniper at the riverbank bothered Kane the most. The boy couldn't have been much older than Kane's own nephew back in Texas. But he had been carrying a rifle and preparing to kill American soldiers, which made him a legitimate military target regardless of his age. Kane's radio buzzed with an incoming message from the intelligence section. "Kane, report to the briefing room immediately.
We've got new intelligence on Rashid."
Kane gathered his gear and made his way to the intelligence facility, wondering what new developments had emerged from their mission. The briefing room was crowded with officers from various units, suggesting that whatever intelligence had been discovered was significant.
"Gentlemen, we've had a breakthrough," the intelligence officer announced as Kane took his seat.
Analysis of the materials recovered from the weapons cache has revealed the location of Abu Rashid's primary safe house. Kane felt his pulse quicken. After months of hunting the bomb maker, they finally had a solid lead on his location. The intelligence officer activated a wall-mounted display showing satellite imagery of a compound about 50 kilometers from their current position. Rashid is believed to be at this location within the next 48 hours for a meeting with senior al-Qaeda leadership. This represents our best opportunity to capture or eliminate him.
Kane studied the satellite imagery carefully.
The target compound was much larger and better defended than the previous location. Multiple buildings, high walls, and what appeared to be prepared defensive positions around the perimeter.
This is going to require a much larger operation, Rodriguez observed.
We're talking about a full platoon assault, possibly with armor support.
The intelligence officer nodded. That's exactly what's being planned.
But we're also going to need sniper support to eliminate sentries and provide overwatch during the assault. Kane knew where this conversation was heading. His performance during the previous mission had demonstrated his capabilities under extreme conditions. The commanders were going to want him involved in whatever operation they planned against Rashid's compound. Kane, the intelligence officer continued, your marksmanship skills and knowledge of enemy tactics make you an essential part of this operation.
Are you prepared for another mission? Kane didn't hesitate.
After months of hunting Abu Rashid, the opportunity to finally capture the man responsible for so many American deaths was too important to pass up.
Yes, sir. When do we leave?
The intelligence officer smiled grimly.
Mission briefing is at 0600 tomorrow. This time, we're going to get him.
As Kane left the briefing room, he felt the familiar mixture of anticipation and apprehension that preceded every major operation. The mission to capture Abu Rashid would be dangerous and complex, but it represented the best chance to eliminate a significant threat to American forces and Iraqi civilians. Kane spent the rest of the evening preparing his equipment and reviewing intelligence reports about the target compound. Tomorrow would bring another test of his skills and training, but tonight, he could only prepare and wait. In less than 18 hours, Kane would be back in combat, facing an enemy who had learned from the previous engagement and would be expecting American forces.
The stakes couldn't be higher, and failure would mean that Abu Rashid would continue his campaign of terror against innocent people.
But Kane had confidence in his abilities and his teammates. They had trained for years for exactly this type of mission, and their previous engagement had demonstrated their ability to adapt and overcome unexpected challenges. As Kane drifted off to sleep, his last thought was of the young sniper at the riverbank. Tomorrow's mission might provide answers about why that boy had been there and what role he played in Rashid's organization. But, regardless of what they discovered, Kane was ready to do whatever was necessary to complete the mission and protect his fellow soldiers. The mission briefing began at exactly 0600 hours in the largest conference room at the forward operating base. Kane sat alongside 23 other elite operators from multiple special forces units, all focused intently on the intelligence officer who was outlining what would become known as Operation Desert Strike. Abu Rashid has been confirmed at this compound for the past 72 hours, the briefing officer announced, pointing to aerial photographs displayed on multiple screens around the room. Intelligence sources indicate he's meeting with 3 senior al-Qaeda operatives to plan a major attack on coalition forces in Baghdad.
Kane studied the target imagery carefully.
The compound was significantly more fortified than their previous target, with concrete walls 8 feet high, guard towers at each corner, and what appeared to be prepared fighting positions throughout the interior. This wouldn't be a simple snatch and grab operation. Lieutenant Commander Rodriguez leaned over to Kane and whispered, "Looks like they learned from our last visit.
They're not taking any chances this time."
The intelligence officer continued his presentation, highlighting key features of the compound and known enemy capabilities. We estimate 12 to 15 enemy fighters inside the compound, all well-armed and professionally trained. They have night vision equipment, body armor, and at least 2 crew-served weapons. Kane noted the locations of the guard towers and estimated the ranges from various sniper positions around the compound. The towers would need to be neutralized simultaneously to prevent the guards from alerting the interior defenders or calling for reinforcements. The assault will be conducted by 2 SEAL teams supported by Army Rangers and Delta Force operators, the briefing continued. Sniper teams will establish overwatch positions to eliminate sentries and provide fire support during the assault phase. Kane felt the familiar pre-mission tension building in his stomach. This operation would be the largest and most complex he had participated in during his deployment. Success would mean eliminating one of the most dangerous terrorists in Iraq, but failure could result in significant casualties among the assault teams.
Major Sarah Patterson, the overall mission commander, stood to address the assembled operators.
Ladies and gentlemen, this is our best opportunity to capture Abu Rashid alive. We need intelligence on his network and future operations.
However, if capture is not possible, elimination is authorized.
Kane raised his hand and waited for recognition.
Ma'am, what's the timeline for this operation? Are we looking at immediate execution or do we have time for additional reconnaissance?
Excellent question, Major Patterson replied. Intelligence indicates that Rashid will leave the compound within 36 hours.
We launch at 2,300 hours tonight.
That gave Kane less than 17 hours to prepare for what would likely be the most challenging shot of his career. The compound was located in terrain that offered limited sniper positions, and the ranges to key targets would be at the outer limits of his rifle's effective range. After the main briefing, Kane attended a smaller planning session with the other sniper teams that would support the operation. 3 two-man sniper teams would establish positions around the compound, each responsible for specific sectors and targets.
Kane, you and Martinez will take the northern approach, Staff Sergeant Rebecca Hayes announced.
She was the senior sniper on the operation and would coordinate fire support for the assault teams. Your primary targets are the North Guard Tower and the main gate sentries.
Kane nodded and began studying detailed photographs of his assigned sector.
The northern approach offered the best concealment for infiltration, but it also meant shooting across the compound's longest axis to reach some targets.
What's the maximum range we're looking at? Martinez asked, studying the same imagery over Kane's shoulder.
About 600 meters to the far guard tower, Kane calculated.
Definitely doable,
but we'll need to account for wind conditions and the fact that we'll be shooting slightly uphill.
Martinez nodded grimly.
He would serve as Kane's spotter, using high-powered optics to help identify targets and call wind adjustments. The two men had worked together on previous missions and had developed the kind of seamless communication that was essential for effective sniper operations. The remainder of the day was spent in intensive preparation. Kane and Martinez studied every photograph and intelligence report available about the target compound. They memorized the layout of buildings, the locations of likely defensive positions, and the patterns of sentry movement that had been observed through aerial surveillance. Kane also spent time preparing his rifle and ammunition. For this mission, he would be using a .300 Winchester Magnum bolt-action rifle specifically designed for long-range precision shooting. Each round was hand-selected and tested to ensure maximum accuracy at extended ranges. At 1800 hours, Kane joined the other operators for a final meal before the mission. The dining facility was unusually quiet, with each man focused on his own pre-mission rituals and mental preparation. Kane had learned years ago that talking too much before a dangerous operation only increased anxiety and reduced focus.
Martinez sat down across from Kane with a tray of food that he barely touched.
"You ever think about what happens if this goes sideways?" he asked quietly.
Kane considered the question carefully before responding. Every mission has risks.
But this is what we trained for. We know our jobs, we trust our equipment, and we have the best teammates in the world watching our backs.
Martinez nodded but didn't look entirely convinced.
Kane understood his partner's concerns. This would be Martinez's first mission as a spotter on such a high-stakes operation. The pressure to perform flawlessly was enormous, and mistakes could cost lives. "Just stick to your training," Kane advised. "Call what you see, trust your observations, and don't second-guess yourself.
You've earned your place on this team."
At 2,100 hours, the operators began their final equipment checks and mission preparations. Kane carefully cleaned his rifle one last time, verified his scope settings, and packed his ammunition in a specific order that would allow him to quickly access different types of rounds if needed. The helicopter ride to the target area was conducted in complete silence, with each operator lost in his own thoughts and final preparations. Kane used the flight time to visualize the mission from beginning to end, mentally rehearsing each shot he might need to make. As the helicopters approached the drop-off point, Kane could see the target compound in the distance. Even from several kilometers away, it looked formidable, a concrete fortress surrounded by open ground that would make any assault extremely dangerous. The sniper teams were inserted first, dropped off at separate locations where they could infiltrate to their assigned positions without being detected. Kane and Martinez moved carefully through the darkness, using night vision equipment and their knowledge of stealth techniques to approach their overwatch position. The terrain around the compound was more challenging than the aerial photographs had suggested. Rocky ground with scattered boulders provided some concealment, but there were also wide areas of open space that had to be crossed without being seen by the guards. It took Kane and Martinez 45 minutes to reach their assigned position, a small depression behind a cluster of rocks about 500 meters from the compound's northern wall. From this location, they had clear lines of sight to their assigned targets while remaining hidden from enemy observation. Kane set up his rifle carefully, using a bipod to provide a stable shooting platform. Martinez positioned himself with his spotting scope, beginning the systematic observation of enemy positions and movement patterns that would be crucial for the success of the assault. "I count 4 guards visible," Martinez whispered into his radio. 2 in the north tower, 1 at the main gate, 1 patrolling the east wall. Kane adjusted his rifle position and began acquiring his primary targets through his scope. The range to the north tower was exactly 487 meters according to his laser rangefinder, well within his capabilities but challenging enough to require perfect shooting technique. The other sniper teams checked in with similar reports, confirming that the compound was defended as intelligence had predicted. The assault teams were now moving into their positions, preparing for the coordinated attack that would begin with simultaneous sniper shots to eliminate the sentries. "All sniper teams, this is Overwatch," Staff Sergeant Hayes' voice came through the radio. "Stand by for target assignment. On my mark, engage assigned targets simultaneously." Kane settled into his shooting position and placed his crosshairs on the guard in the north tower. The man was standing casually, unaware that he was being watched by multiple sniper teams. In a few minutes, the compound would erupt in violence, but, for now, everything remained peaceful. "Sniper teams, targets are assigned," Hayes continued. "Kane, you have the north tower. Johnson team has the main gate. Williams team has the east patrol. Engage on my mark." Kane controlled his breathing and began his final target acquisition process. The guard in the tower had moved slightly, requiring Kane to adjust his aim point. Through his scope, Kane could see that the man was young, probably in his early 20s, carrying an AK-47 and wearing a military-style vest. "Stand by," Hayes announced. 3, 2, 1, execute. Kane squeezed his trigger just as his training had taught him, following through completely before observing the result. Through his scope, he watched the guard in the north tower collapse immediately, eliminated by a single precision shot to the center of his chest. "North tower clear," Kane reported calmly. Similar reports came from the other sniper teams, confirming that all exterior sentries had been eliminated simultaneously. The assault teams immediately began their movement toward the compound walls, using ladders and explosive charges to breach the perimeter defenses. Kane shifted his focus to providing fire support for the assault teams as they moved through the compound. Through his scope, he could see muzzle flashes from inside several buildings as the defenders realized they were under attack and began fighting back. "Kane, I need suppressive fire on the building with the red door," Rodriguez's voice crackled through the radio. "We've got multiple shooters and they're pinning down Team 2. Kane identified the building and began engaging targets visible through the windows and doorways. His precise shots forced the enemy defenders to take cover, allowing the assault team to advance and clear the structure room by room. The battle for the compound was intense but brief. The assault teams moved with the precision that came from years of training and combat experience, systematically clearing each building while the sniper teams provided overwatch and fire support. After 20 minutes of fighting, the compound was secure. Kane could see American operators moving through the buildings, searching for Abu Rashid and any intelligence materials that might be present. "All teams, this is Team Leader," Major Patterson's voice announced over the radio. "Primary target is not present. Repeat, Rashid is not in the compound. Continues search for intelligence materials. Kane felt a mixture of disappointment and frustration. After all the planning and preparation, Rashid had somehow escaped again. But Kane also knew that operations rarely went exactly as planned, and there might still be valuable intelligence to be recovered from the compound. Kane, Martinez, move up and establish security on the compound in trance, Rodriguez ordered. We need overwatch while the intelligence teams do their work. Kane and Martinez gathered their equipment and moved to a new position closer to the compound. From this location, they could watch for reinforcements while the assault teams searched for documents, computers, and other materials that might lead to Rashid's location. As Kane settled into his new position, he noticed movement in the distance beyond the compound. Through his scope, he could see what appeared to be a vehicle approaching along the road they had used for their infiltration. Possible vehicle contact, bearing northwest, approximately 2 kilometers out, Kane reported. Single vehicle, moving toward the compound. Martinez focused his spotting scope on the approaching vehicle and began providing details. Looks like a pickup truck, possibly technical with mounted weapon. 2 or 3 personnel visible. Kane began tracking the vehicle through his scope, ready to engage if it posed a threat to the assault teams. As the truck got closer, Kane could see that it was indeed a pickup truck with a heavy machine gun mounted in the bed.
Definitely hostile, Martinez confirmed.
They've got a crew-served weapon and they're moving fast toward our position. Kane estimated the range to the approaching vehicle and began calculating the lead he would need for a moving target. Shooting at a vehicle traveling at high speed required different techniques than engaging stationary targets.
Kane, can you stop that vehicle? Rodriguez asked over the radio.
Kane watched the technical through his scope as it bounced over the rough terrain, its mounted machine gun clearly visible. The truck was now about 800 meters away and closing fast, well within his rifle's effective range but moving too quickly for a guaranteed first-round hit. Affirmative, Kane replied.
Engaging now.
Kane led the target slightly and squeezed the trigger, sending a .300 Winchester Magnum round downrange toward the speeding truck. Through his scope, Kane watched the bullet impact just behind the vehicle, sending up a spray of dirt and rocks. Miss, right and behind, Martinez called.
Target is still moving, now 700 meters.
Kane worked the bolt of his rifle and chambered a fresh round, adjusting his aim point to account for the vehicle's speed and the range correction Martinez had provided. The technical was now close enough that Kane could see the machine gunner preparing to engage the American forces at the compound. Kane's second shot struck the windshield of the technical, causing the vehicle to swerve violently before rolling over in a cloud of dust and debris. The threat had been eliminated before the enemy could bring their heavy weapon into effective range. Target neutralized, Kane reported as he watched the overturned truck through his scope. No movement visible from the vehicle. The search of the compound continued for another hour, with intelligence specialists examining every document, computer, and piece of equipment they could find. While Abu Rashid himself wasn't present, the materials recovered would provide valuable information about his network and operations. All teams, prepare for extraction, Major Patterson announced.
We have what we came for. Helicopters inbound, ETA 10 minutes.
Kane and Martinez gathered their equipment and moved to the designated landing zone outside the compound. Around them, the other operators were completing their mission tasks and preparing for the helicopter ride back to base. As Kane waited for extraction, he reflected on the mission and its outcome. While they hadn't captured Rashid, the operation had been successful in other ways. The compound had been neutralized, valuable intelligence had been recovered, and no American personnel had been seriously injured. The helicopter ride back to base was much more relaxed than the infiltration flight. The operators talked quietly among themselves, conducting informal debriefings and sharing observations about the mission.
Good shooting tonight, Martinez said to Kane as the helicopter flew through the darkness.
That technical could have caused serious problems if you hadn't stopped it. Kane nodded but remained focused on the bigger picture. Rashid is still out there, and he's obviously learning from each engagement. Next time, he'll be even more careful about his security. Back at the forward operating base, Kane participated in the formal mission debriefing and equipment cleaning that followed every operation. The intelligence analysts were already beginning their examination of the materials recovered from the compound, looking for clues that might lead to Rashid's location. The next morning, Kane was awakened by an urgent message to report to the intelligence section immediately. He dressed quickly and made his way to the briefing facility, wondering what new developments had emerged from the previous night's mission.
Kane, we've had a breakthrough, the intelligence officer announced as Kane entered the room.
Analysis of the materials from the compound has revealed something extraordinary. Kane took a seat and waited for the briefing to continue. Around the room, several other officers were studying documents and computer displays with intense concentration.
The young sniper you eliminated during your first mission, the intelligence officer continued, was Abu Rashid's nephew.
The boy's death triggered a personal vendetta that explains why Rashid has been so aggressive in his responses to our operations. Kane felt a chill run down his spine. The teenage sniper at the riverbank hadn't been a random fighter, he had been family to one of Iraq's most dangerous terrorists. That explained the professional response force and the elaborate security measures they had encountered. There's more, the intelligence officer continued. Communications intercepted from the compound indicate that Rashid is planning a major retaliation for his nephew's death. He's calling in favors from across the terrorist network to mount a coordinated attack. Kane realized that his actions during that first mission had escalated the conflict far beyond what anyone had anticipated. What started as a routine capture operation had become a personal war between American Special Forces and one of the most capable terrorist leaders in the region.
Sir, what kind of retaliation are we talking about? Kane asked. The intelligence officer's expression was grim.
Coordinated attacks on multiple American bases, suicide bombings in Baghdad, and attempts to assassinate senior coalition officials. Rashid is pulling out all the stops.
Kane understood the implications immediately.
His accurate shooting had saved his teammates and eliminated immediate threats, but it had also triggered a cycle of violence that could result in casualties far beyond anything they had previously faced.
What's our response? Kane asked.
The intelligence officer activated a wall display showing satellite imagery of a new location.
We've identified Rashid's current hideout.
This time, we're going to end this once and for all. Kane studied the new target imagery, already beginning to plan his approach and identify potential shooting positions. The war with Abu Rashid wasn't over, it was just beginning. But Kane was ready for whatever came next, knowing that his skills and training would be essential for protecting his fellow soldiers and completing the mission. As Kane left the intelligence facility to begin preparing for what would likely be the final confrontation with Abu Rashid, he thought again about the young sniper at the riverbank. That single shot had changed everything, setting in motion events that would test every aspect of his training and dedication. But Kane had no regrets about his actions. In war, soldiers had to make split-second decisions based on the information available to them. The young man at the river had been carrying a weapon and preparing to kill American personnel. In that context, Kane's response had been not only appropriate but necessary. Now, Kane would have the opportunity to finish what that first shot had started. Abu Rashid would soon discover that targeting American Special Forces came with consequences that even the most dangerous terrorist couldn't escape.